I'm looking for participation today.
Oh, all right.
So you be ready to raise your hand. Good morning. The hour has come upon us. Everybody had a decent night's sleep, I hope. Wide awake. I hope I don't put you to sleep this morning. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I've only got 2 verses we're considering this morning, so I got 35 minutes. I'm going to need some help. Therefore, I'm looking for some participation. I'll be asking questions. I've got my hearing aids in, so I might be able to hear you, but you still have to what? Speak up so I can hear you, and I'd like to repeat what maybe you say so others can hear you as well. So, based upon what artists have drawn over here, does anybody have any idea who we're talking about? Can't hear you. Enoch. All right, this is our friend Enoch, and we're going to be thinking a little bit about Enoch. We know he's in the Hall of Fame in Hebrews 11, and I want to start out by asking you 3 things you already know about Enoch. What's one thing you know about Enoch? He was taken up. That's probably the thing we remember most. What's another thing about Enoch? He walked with God. A third thing about Enoch. Yeah, he never died because he was taken up. A fourth thing about Enoch. Father of Methuselah. A fifth thing about Enoch. We'll stop at number 5. He lived by faith. He lived by faith. So we're going to examine these kinds of things as we go through these particular 2 verses. And what we'll do is we'll read them first, then we'll kind of take the first one, break it down a little bit, and I'm looking for participation. We hear from preachers and elders all the time, so I want to hear from the saints as well. So, first verse in Genesis 5, Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And then we go into the New Testament. In Hebrews, by faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. And he was not found because God took him up. That's capitalized because it's a quote from the Old Testament. For he obtained witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. So let's go ahead and get started and think a little bit about some of these thoughts that we have in these verses. It says, Enoch walked with God. And so I like to, kind of throw out the question over here. What does it mean to walk with God? What does it mean to walk with God? Don't all raise your hand at one time. Okay, it has to do with obeying God. Can we elaborate a little bit on that maybe? Doing what he says, hearing his instructions and following them. Okay, so he walked with God. As we think a little bit about that, the scriptures have a lot of verses that talk about walking a pathway of righteousness, or walking the wide road, walking the narrow road. There are a lot of verses on walking. And one of the verses that catch my attention is found in Proverbs, and this is in Proverbs 14, or verse 4, 18, and 19. I apologize that maybe it's a little difficult to see, but it says, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. We're looking at a metaphor. The pathway of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. And of course, the way of the wicked is like darkness. So thinking about this metaphor, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. How do we understand that? How can we understand and meditate upon that the pathway of the righteous is like the light of dawn? It gets brighter and brighter until the full day. So I want to elaborate upon that a little bit, if you will.
I'll say something.
Yes.
As I've taken on certain studies that were difficult for me, calculus, I go in and I'm clueless at the start. But every day that I apply myself to understanding that, I have this greater understanding and greater illumination as to what it is and what its function is and how it's going to benefit me in mathematics.
The light comes on, it gets brighter?
It gets brighter. The more I research it, the more I understand it, the clearer it gets, and the more benefit it is to me in my mathematic application. And our relationship with God is much like that. The more we come to know and understand Him, the greater we are able to perceive who He is, what His plan is, what His intention is, and it illuminates our lives.
Yeah, and as we walk down that pathway of righteousness, we find greater blessings coming our way. Blessings of joy and peace, fulfillment in our lives, all these kind of things. When I sometimes get up real early in the morning, I'll go outside, it's pitch black, I'll sit out there, and you don't see any color. Everything is just dark and gray. But as the dawn starts coming, you see a little more color, and then the sun comes up, and you really have the ability to enjoy the wonderful bright colors and the creation of God. And that's the way it is as we walk as a Christian. The further we get down that path of righteousness, the more beautiful the life is, the more fulfilling and satisfying the blessings are right there. Yes, Charlie.
Well, I can't find it. It may not be in this song book, but there's a song that says, the longer I serve him, the greater he grows. Each day is like heaven. The idea is, the more we serve him, the greater he grows, the greater our knowledge of him, and the greater our understanding.
Yeah, the path of the righteousness. Yes. Did you raise your hand? Oh, okay, you're pointing at okay. My son-in-law was pointing to him. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on this particular proverb? Yeah. How did you know I was going to do that? Okay, exactly. Well, elaborate upon that a little bit.
I was just thinking that if you have an affinity for somebody and you're developing a relationship, the more time you spend together, the deeper that understanding, appreciation gets, and the deeper the relationship gets. But if you're not in agreement, you find out that this isn't working for me, it's not benefit from either one, you generally separate your ways. But Enoch was in agreement with God. He appreciated him, loved him, adored him, served him.
Walked with him, yeah.
Walked with him in every sense.
Exactly, and that's exactly what Enoch was doing. And we'll look at the environment Enoch was in a little bit later on, but it really brings out a wonderful thought. And when we talk about this kind of thing, there's an application for us as well, because we see God commands us. There's a lot of verses. I just chose this one that brings out the fact that he wants us to walk in his way as well. So we read, Paul is writing to those at Philippi, and he spent some time there. He was an example. They saw Paul's life, and he says to them, however, let us keep living by the same standard to which we have attained. Brethren, join in following my example. They saw him. He was maturing in the faith himself, and observe those who walk according to the pattern that you have in us. Is it important for us to have good role models? Really important, yeah. And so they looked to Paul. They could see, well, here's my maturity is going to be. Here's where I'm striving for. And so, yeah, walk according to the pattern. We can elaborate upon the pattern. The pattern also would have to do with other things, doctrinal matters, the worship, the work, the organization, things of that nature. So certainly we have those things. So walking with God individually, yeah, following in that path of righteousness and also looking at others, observing their lives. All right, let's kind of move on a little bit. We have a word right before Enoch. This is a New American Standard, and that word is the word then. And this kind of caught me a little bit by surprise as I was meditating upon that. And I was wondering, well, what's going on here? It says, Enoch lived 65 years, became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah. So a couple thoughts came in through my mind, and there are, I guess, two possibilities over here. One being, did it take Enoch all of 65 years to begin his walk with God? Was he kind of doing his own thing the first 65 years, kind of walking in his own way? Or was he already walking in the righteous pathway before Methuselah's birth? What do you think? Yeah.
I think he had a boy and started praying to God.
He had a what?
He had a boy and started praying to God.
He had a boy. Okay, is that significant when an event like that happens? You look inside yourself? Yeah, I know when my firstborn son came into the world, I started thinking, wow, look at this responsibility that I have. What am I going to do? I better be sure that I serve God and be an example and teach him in his ways. That's one way of looking at it. And certainly when someone has a life-changing event like this, a child is born, is this an opportunity to maybe talk to people a little bit? Well, how is your life going to change with this child coming into your world? Are you going to, maybe do things a little bit differently, increase your devotion, your example before God? If they're not Christians, this would be an opportunity to talk a little bit about them. But what do you think about the two possibilities? Was he doing his own thing before this time, or was he walking with God previously? Let's get a preacher or no. Okay, I was going to say, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking that it could be either one, but you could also mix it. I like the gentleman used the word relationship, or the walking, and perhaps the change in his life drew him closer for a greater relationship.
Okay, very good thought. All right, let's think a little bit about this word then. Not all the translations use the word then. New International Version says after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked. King James, and Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah. I kind of of the opinion that he probably was already walking with God. If you look at all the other begets and everything, they're all there, and they just throw this one in as a fact that he was, walking with God even afterwards. But I guess it's neither here nor there. The idea is we need to be walking with God. I think we can all certainly agree with that. All right, any other thoughts or comments on this particular verse before we move on? We're going to look at other things, but yeah. Yeah, we're looking at the lineage of him. Enoch, we know, walked with God. And the lineage, we have Methuselah, and we have Lamech, okay, and then we have Noah, don't we? And so we're thinking of this is the better lineage. We look at the lineage of Cain earlier in chapter 5. It's not a good lineage. This is where the wickedness and evil permeated on the earth. Another thought was over here somewhere, yeah.
You read here in chapter 5, he's given an account of this lineage. It says, so-and-so lived, and father so-and-so, and so-and-so lived. When you get to Enoch, Enoch walked with God. And especially in Genesis, after reading about Adam and Eve, they walked in the garden with God, and then there's the fall, and you're just reading this stuff. Suddenly Enoch is walking with God, which is, I think, a big difference with some of these other people.
I think so too. All right, we're going to explore some of the hows and the whens and the whys. And again, some of this stuff we have to make inferences. They may not necessarily be 100% correct, But that's what meditation is all about. We meditate. God, we find in the scriptures, Lord, let my meditations be acceptable unto you. So we're sharing the knowledge. There's a lot of good wisdom and knowledge in this group and experience in the scriptures. We want to try to mine that and bring that to our attention. All right, so what's kind of amazing about Enoch is the length of his walk with God. It lasted for 300 years or more if we take some of the time before that we were discussing. So I'm asking the question, how many years might we serve God in our lifetime? How many years might we serve God in our lifetime? It's going to depend upon when we started. You have early teenagers, they might get 50, 60, 70 years, who knows, I'm hoping that I can get another 10 or 15. I don't know what kind of mileage I have left in me. However, we have nothing compared to what Enoch was going through. You might think your life is kind of challenging and hard and difficult. You've got things that are happening. You wonder, can I get through this? Well, look what Enoch did. He lived day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade. What else can we say? Century after century trying to do what's right. And we'll notice an environment that he lived in which was, really horrible. And so we can get through it. I'm kind of glad we have a shorter lifespan than they did way back in that particular time. All right, let's look at another thought over here, and that is when we talk about coming into the kingdom, Jesus did some teaching about this in the parable of the vineyard grower, and we find, I'm going to kind of summarize it right here. A landowner, he wanted those to work in his vineyard early in the morning, 6 o'clock, we might say. He brought in a number of people. Then at 9 o'clock, he went out and brought more people in. At noon hour, he brought more people in. The 9th hour, which is about 3 o'clock, more people in. Probably 5 o'clock in the afternoon, last hour of the working day, he found some people standing around. They weren't doing it. He brought them in. And then we know when they collected the wages, the last people that got in got their denarius, and the others were thinking, we're going to get what? We're going to get more. And of course, they grumbled a little bit and complained when they received the same. And so he's talking about coming into the vineyard to work in the kingdom of God. We all maybe come in at different times, but God is still wanting none to perish, but all to come to repentance. And he's willing to have that blood of his son be shed for the forgiveness of sins. I knew a man who was 95 years old who became a Christian. He was baptized at that age, and he died about a year later. I would say he came in close to midnight, so to speak. He was not much there. But yet, God desires that all men, of course, be saved. So let's kind of talk real quickly over here. Now, we have what, till 25 till? Okay. I'm hoping we can get it done. All right, what are some of the advantages of walking with God earlier in life? Let's get it.
You are spared from a lot of grief if you follow God's plan from the get-go.
Good, definitely. Spared a lot of grief. What are some other advantages of walking with God early in life? You can accomplish more in the service of God. Yeah, certainly you can accomplish more. You can grow in what? Grace and knowledge. Your life can be more fulfilling and satisfying. Like you say, we're not making all the mistakes necessarily of trial and error that we did before. There are a lot of things, certainly the advantages of beginning that walk early in life. You've got more energy when you're younger. You got more strength, okay? All these things. You can be an example for your children, can't you? Sometimes people become a Christian too late and their children are already past the point of that influence that's upon them. So, yeah, becoming a child of God early is really a wonderful thing. Other thoughts on that before we move on? Yeah. One more time? Mature in the faith. Yeah, wonderful to be able to have that confidence, okay? We're going to look at the faith aspect of it here in just a little bit. Good thought. Yes?
I was just going to say that being able to walk with God early in life is to bring more people to God.
Yeah, definitely. We can certainly have a greater influence in helping to bring other people into the kingdom, can't we? Very good. All right, let's move it on, and we're going to think a little bit how he lived his life. You know, we have a lot of information about how we are to live our life as Christians, don't we? New Testament is full of things. The Jews, the Israelites, they have a whole Old Testament to teach them, you know, the law and how they're supposed to live their life. But we're looking at a guy who's a patriarch who lived, you know, back before there was anything written. They would receive their information, you know, maybe in dreams or in visions, or God spoke directly to them. So we're going to try to look a little bit about how Enoch lived his life. How did he actually walk with God? But let's review this verse again. In Hebrews 11, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. He obtained the witness that before his being taken up he was pleasing to God. Without faith it is impossible to please God. All right, so as we think a little bit about this, why was he taken up by God according to this verse? There's two reasons here. What's one of them? The first reason is, it was by faith. And, you know, we look at this expression, by faith. The book of Hebrews, chapter 11, is full of that expression. And we can kind of understand, we look at Abel by faith. Did God speak to Abel and tell him how to do the sacrifice? Yeah. Now we skip Enoch temporarily. Did God speak to Noah and tell him what to do? Yes. Did God speak to Abraham? Yes. Did Sarah hear what her role was going to be? Yes. We just look, God spoke to these people. They were able to receive all this information. And it says by faith, Enoch was taken up. So how do we understand what this means by faith? Well, maybe we should look at what it says in the very first verse. The very first verse in Hebrews 11, we read, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Apply that to Enoch a little bit. The conviction of things not seen. Can we infer that God communicated in some way with Enoch and gave him expectations? Here's what it means to live and please me and walk in a good way, walk in the pathway of righteousness. Can we make that inference? I think we probably can, that he did it by faith. We read in the New Testament, faith comes by what? Hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. So yeah, I think there's probably that inference. How he communicated this, we don't know. But somehow he had to have a motivation for 300 years to walk in a good way. Charlie.
Why do you suppose that God singled out Enoch? What made Enoch any more special than John the Baptist, for example, or Paul, or Abraham, those people, that God would single out Enoch? I don't care why he did.
I have a thought on it. It might not be 100% right. We're going to get to that point just a few minutes here, or hopefully sooner. And we'll kind of chew on that one a little bit, why maybe he did single out Enoch. But I don't really know emphatically why.
I think it's likely more like Enoch singled out God.
Enoch chose God.
Singled out God.
Okay. He pleased God. Our second point is he was pleasing to God. We're going to elaborate upon that in just a little bit. Okay, so there was obviously some kind of a communication for him at this particular time to be able to understand what it means to walk with God. All right, let's kind of move it on a little bit over here. He was pleasing to God. That's the second reason that is stated over here in this particular verse. So we ask the question, well, how would this pleasing God show up in his everyday life? Again, we know how we please God. We know how the Jews could please God. Well, what about these patriarchs? How are they going to know what's right and wrong? Let's look at it that way. How are they going to know what's right and wrong? To please God or not to please God? One more time? Okay, they were told. I believe there was communication. And there's another factor. Did God ever instill within man what is right and wrong? Yeah. Turn to Romans. Yeah, Romans, the second chapter. Let's look at this real quickly. We're going to look at verse 14, 15, and 16. Romans, the second chapter. He's talking about Gentiles. Of course, he has the purpose making comparisons between Jews and Gentiles in this Roman, but the principle is the same. If you look at Romans 2, verse 14, for when Gentiles who do not have the law, talking about the law of Moses, do what? Instinctively, the things of the law, these not having the law, are a law to themselves. So there's some instinctive things that God has put in humanity. It says, do this or don't do this. We'll elaborate on that in just a little bit. Verse 15, in that they show the work of the law written in their hearts. Okay, their conscience bearing witness and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them. So, God has put certain things in us that we instinctively know is right or wrong. Do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery, do not covet. The whole 10 Commandments, there's several of the don'ts. Those things, I believe, God has put into us. We know it's instinctively wrong to do harm to one another. The do's we find in the old law, they may not have known honor your father and your mother is a do. That should be something that would be instinctive. Also, the idea of keep the Sabbath day, keep it holy. That would be something they would have to actually learn. But God, I believe, has put those things in us, and we make those kinds of choices not to participate in the evil things. Why? Because we have a conscience. Our conscience will accuse us if we do, or, hey, I didn't do those things were wrong. My conscience excuses me. Does that make a little bit of sense? Okay. And thoughts or comments on that point? Yeah.
I would assume that maybe we can't tell from the original language or anything, but when it says pleasing to God, there must be a level that is just unheard of before, or maybe even since. And the reason I think that is because I've been amazed over the years whenever I read the story of David that he was called a man after God's own heart. He numbered the people in direct rebellion to God. He's supposed to be a man of integrity. He's supposed to be a leader of God's people. He loves and adores God more than anybody else in his nation, and his direct rebellion. Not even to mention the adultery of Bathsheba and the sneaky murder of Uriah. And yet God calls him a man after his own heart. So when it says that Enoch was pleasing to God, there must be a level of personal integrity, and maybe not 100% perfection, but maybe he was at the 90-something percentile. So that's why I think that maybe God said, this man is so different. This man is so pure. He's so much like me.
Okay.
He pleases me.
All right. Good thought. Let's move on a little bit we're running a little bit short on time. Any thoughts about the environment Enoch lived in? And I think we can look in Genesis to chapter 6, and we can read that how the wickedness of man was great on the earth. Every thought and the imagination of man's heart was only what? Evil continually. Violence filled the earth. This was a horrible environment to be living in. And this is the environment that I think we can understand Enoch lived in it. Just because you go from chapter 5 to chapter 6, this chapter 6 started probably way before Enoch's time. But he was living in a horrible environment. And of course, do we live in a bad environment? In many ways, it's not getting any better. We have a lot of challenges and things of that nature also. But when we're thinking about the environment that he lived in, and then we might think, well, why, God? Why did you take him? I don't really know the answer. We know he was pleasing to God. We can think about other deliverances that God had made to other people. For example, Lot. Lot chose unwisely to live where? in Sodom. And what he found himself into was a vile environment. And we read in the New Testament, in the book of Peter, that this righteous man, his soul was vexed, or we might read tormented, day after day as he saw all that was going on. So God made plans to deliver him out of that place. God delivered Daniel. God delivered Noah. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We just go on and on. God had deliverances. Was this a deliverance from a horrible environment that he was living in? You know, quite possibly it was. Again, these are just meditations you think a little bit about, but God knows how to deliver us, and that's really an important part. But let's get back to the pleasing thing, because we read in the scriptures, we also have as our ambition, whether we're still in this life or whether we're home with the Lord, to be pleasing to him. That's really the main point of this whole lesson, walking with God, pleasing him. So we have to do some introspection. First of all, this word pleasing with the Greek word means to endeavor to please another, not in self-interest. It's always, I want to please God. At the end of your day, you might ask yourself the question, what have I done that was pleasing in the sight of God today? Can I review my day? What my attitudes were, my actions, the things that I decided to do? Did I make good decisions? Let's real quickly look at a few things over here. Is God pleased with the way I use my time? Do we spend a lot of time in idleness? You know, we're told to make the most of our time, for the days are evil. Do you spend some of your time, enough of your time, in study and meditation of his word? Think about this on your own personal level. You know, what did I do, for example, yesterday? How much time did I spend, pondering the things of God? How do I use the abilities that God has given me, the opportunities that are in front of me? Am I applying myself to these kinds of things? How do I treat my family, my brethren, and others? You know, all these are questions that we can look at. My attitude toward those that we have to be in submission to. We may not like what is over us governmentally or whatever, but God has told us, here is, you walk with me, you have to have these attitudes and actions. And so this is a good thing for us. He was pleasing to God. And we're not going to be 100% pleasing. Like it was pointed out, David, he did a lot of things wrong, but he repented, didn't he? When his time came to understand, he repented. So certainly we're going to falter because we are human from time to time. But let's kind of finish up with the last few minutes that we have. This taking up of Enoch. Now, how did he do it? We have no idea. Did he just kind of pull him up or something? Was there a chariot that came like in the days of Elijah? We don't read about anything of that nature. But, he was taken up. When did he do it? I think we can understand when he did it. Methuselah lived to be 969 years, and then Enoch lived another 300 years after that. So if you do a little math subtraction, you got 669 years. He was taken up, I believe, before the flood, if my figuring was correct on that. What does this taking up of Enoch teach us? Let's use that as our last thought question here. What does the taking up of Enoch teach us? Besides the fact that we need to be pleasing to God and we need to walk with God, we discussed those. Is there anything else this taking up teaches us?
Very likely there is a better place.
Little louder?
That there are some things that are important in the way that we live our lives, and they have an effect.
Okay. Another thought, I didn't catch where it was. Yes, there's another place after earth, okay? So we're thinking over here, as Jesus was ready to raise Lazarus from the dead, he's telling Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even if he dies. And Jesus went on to elaborate when he was teaching that hour is coming when all who were in the grave will hear his voice, and will come forth those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life. And so, I wouldn't call it a foreshadowing of us, but certainly we're going to be also taken up as we are raised from the dead. It's a wonderful thing to think of. But we need to be striving to walk with God, to please him, to do his will. Any closing thoughts here before we finish up?
Something that
the Spirit of God being revealed with this?
Yeah, something about God's attitude about us that's revealed in them. I can't quite put my finger on it.
It's a loving attitude, isn't it? It's a kind attitude. Maybe he just kind of think, well, here's Enoch. He's in this horrible condition. Even though he's trying to be honest, he's trying to walk. You know, we read in Amos, not Amos, but in Micah, the Lord requires three things of us to, he wants us to walk honestly, or justly. He wants us to do loving kindness or mercy,